Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Auld. I'm a Baltimore captain and a member of SWAPA's Economic and Financial Analysis Committee. We're going to spend a few minutes here in this briefing talking about compensation and specifically on pay rates. You've seen some other educational materials, some discussions of compensation. Here you'll get a visual representation of what the pay rates look like, and we'll show you some of the underlying mechanics that will show you how we got to the pay rates that you see in Contract 2020. We'll break this briefing down into the discussion of pay rates. We'll look at the scale improvements on both the captain and the first officer side. And in the second half of this brief, we'll talk about the comparisons of the Contract 2020 rates compared to our American Delta United peers. So let's first talk about the pay raises. These are the headline numbers you looked at when you saw the materials for Contract 2020. There should be nothing new here. What I'll show you here is 2023 was a 23% raise. Now, this is a notional raise because our pay rates begin on January 1 of 24. But the 23% raise in 23 was the basis for the future rates and set the standard for the compounding. So in 2023, a 23% raise. 24 is a 5% raise compounded to 29.15%, which is the headline number for 2024. 2025 is a 4%, 2026 is a 4%, 2027 is a 4%, and then 2028 is a 3.25% raise. All that compounded, you can see in the red circle on the lower right corner, is a 50% compounded raise. Said another way, the January 1, 2028 rates will be 50% higher than the current book rates. It's important to note that that's just the case for the most senior pilots, Captain 12, as we'll show later in this brief. More junior first officers and junior captains will actually see a slightly higher than that 50% compounded rate. So now let's look at the pay tables in some detail. You have seen these again as you've reviewed Contract 2020. Across the top are the annual raises, the 23, 5, 4, 4, 4, and 3 1/4, and the compounded rates. And then I've highlighted here in the green the Captain 12 of 317.25. And you can see as they follow down in the red box for 2024, how the rates fall out for more junior captains 11 now to the bottom of the pay scale. And again, as I mentioned on the previous slide, that 368.47 is 50% higher than current book of 245.64. Looking at the first officer, just a couple of things to point out on here. First is the top of scale first officer. Again, the 29.15% raise on 1/1/24 is 222.08 for a first officer at the 12-year step. And then looking at the bottom of the scale, our new hires will see a significant improvement from current book of 75.77 to 116.41. Hold that 116.41 in your mind because as you'll see later in this brief, that's a significantly higher new hire pay step than our OAL peers. So how did we get here? So we talked about the 29% and the 5s and 4/4s going forward. But just as important was some of the changes we made inside the scale changes. If you look at the orange line here, this is where Southwest captain scales how they used to be built as a percentage of top of scale captain. So at the most dramatic, at the Captain 1 is 88.1% of Captain 12 pay. Now we don't have any captains at that pay step, so let's work our way up the scale and say at a captain on the 7-year, which we do have, you can see the current book, our captains at the 7-year step are paid 94.6% of top of scale captains, and that will be improved up to this very top line of 96.2. This top line represents the industry standard now, and this is the exact same for American, Delta, United, and Alaska. And we have Contract 2020 moves all of our captain percentage of top of scale to that line. So Southwest now has all moved up, as you see the orange arrow, has moved up to that very top. So what does that actually look like when you plot the pay raises for 2024? Where our senior top of scale captain is at 29.15. It's rounded to 29.2 here. As we work our way backwards on the scale, you can see Captain 11s are a little bit higher, 29.5. That Captain 7 we talked about is at 31.3% pay raise. And of course, the more junior captains would be even higher. So what this shows you is the movement of the captain, the percentage of top of scale to industry standard does have an elevated increase on captain pay. This will become very apparent when you start looking at how the FO scales are created. But before we move to FOs, let's spend a little bit more time with the captains. Let's look at the base wage in 2024 for a captain. Using just at line guarantee, so roughly 88 TFP a month, you can see a captain 12 would be about $334,000. If you add in the 17% NEC and the 1% market-based cash balance plan, that moves up to about $394,000. Now, these charts are just at line guarantee, but most of our pilots fly a little bit above line guarantee. So if we look at what is a typical comparison of roughly 105 TFP a month, our captains will be at about $394 base pay, and with the retirement add-on, around $471,000. Now turning our attention to the FO percentage improvements. And this is where you'll see some significant changes on the FO pay scales, particularly on the most junior side of the FO pay scales. So the blue bars represent FO pay as a percentage of their equivalent step on the captain scale. So if you look at new hire pay under current book, our FOs are paid at 35% of Captain 1 pay. Moving to FO2, you can see they're paid at 50% of Captain 2 pay. The gray bars are our other airline comparisons, and the orange bars are where Contract 2020 landed. And you can see at the FO side that every single step, the FOs have a percentage of equivalent captain step higher than their other airline comparisons. You can see at the new hires, it goes from 35 to 40%. FO2s move from 50 to 55%. There's a significant change at the FO3 from 55 to 65%, and the FO4s move from 60. A couple of minor changes at FO5 and 6, and even FO9s were brought up from 69% to 70%. You can see that our first officers are paid at the highest percentage of equivalent captain pay in the industry. So what does that look like when you look at FO pay raises in 2024? You can see those large changes to the FO percentage of captain pay coupled with the changes in the captain pay as a percentage of their toppest scale translates into some significant differences for the most junior first officers. So First Officer 1's new hires will see a 53.6% increase in pay. First Officer 3's will see a 57.5% increase. And you can see that in 2024, about 55% of our first officers live in these first 4 steps of the pay scale. So over half of the FO list will see a greater than 40% pay raise at data ratification. Those changes, even as they get to the more senior FOs, are all well above 30%. And really, it's only at the most senior first officers, the FO11s and FO12s, roughly 9% of our FOs live in that part of the pay scale. They're at the 29.5 to 29.15% pay raise. Like we showed you for the captains, here's what the base wages look like. So again, use just at line guarantee. You can see new hires are at about $122,000 going up the pay scale. Say FO3s are about $202,000, and the most senior FOs at roughly $234,000. When you add in the 17% NEC and the 1% market-based contribution, you can see the equivalent changes. New hires at roughly almost $145,000, all the way up to the top of scale, about $276,000. Again, recall this is just at line guarantee. If you fly 100, 105 TFP, you'll see a significant increase as well. Last slide before we talk about here is just look at the differential between this is just the wage differential that our pilots can expect to see at data ratification. So all captains can expect to see just at line guarantee between $75,000, $76,000 difference. And our first officers, our new hires, will see about a $42,000 difference. Those FO3s will be around $74,000, and our most senior FOs will be over $50,000. Now, we've spoken here for the last few minutes about the Southwest rates. Now let's turn our attention to how those compare with other airlines. Now, the basis of comparison for these rates going forward is 737-900 pay. That's a pretty apt comparison going forward because as you know, our 800s and MAX 8s with 175 seats, and typically most other airlines with their 900s are somewhere in the 180 to 190 seat. So that's a pretty good comparison for us going forward. You can see that for Southwest, as we spoke about, our rates 5, 4, 4, 4, and a 3.25. And those rates are identical for the other three airlines. American, Delta, and United all capture a 5, 4, and 4 through 2026. And then you see American only has a 3 in 2027, as does United. Delta's contract ends in 2026, so they have yet to establish rates beyond. And of course, we see the 3.25% in 2028. Keep in mind this 1% differential in 2027. As you'll see in some future charts, the comparison of Southwest gets even greater as a result of this 1% difference in 2027. Many of you are familiar with looking at this spaghetti chart that kind of shows how rates grow year over year. I started this chart in the January of 23 for all of the publicly traded airlines. So you'll see the big three, American, Delta, United, and Southwest up near the top. You'll see some of the other airlines that are still in contract negotiations, like Allegiant near the bottom. Airlines like Sun Country and Frontier and Spirit have extensions or have extensions that are expiring. So they're on the lower part of this chart. So focus your attention more on the top part. Here you can see in 2023, Southwest is the orange line tracking going forward. I've posted the numbers here at the conversion rate of 1.149 TFP per hour. And so you can see Southwest in 2024 is at 364.52, going up to 379.10, 394.27. Taking that all the way out to 2028, you can see Southwest hourly converted wage is at $423.37. And you'll see a little bit of space between the orange and that gray line, which is the American and United line. Just a little bit of space going up to 2026. You see the Delta grow just a little bit more in 2027 because of that 1% differential I told you about on the previous slide. And of course, we have the 2028 raise, which gives us a little bit more breathing room as well. If you find this chart difficult to follow, this one might be a little bit easier. This is the 12-year captain rate, just showing where we're on the far right at that hourly converted rate, 364.52. And it shows you pretty clearly that we're 1% above Delta, United, and American's equivalent 900 rate. And you follow the other carriers down to the left, we're 6.7% above Alaska, 9.5% above JetBlue, and so on. Let's turn our attention now to the first officer. I've given you two slides here. We'll look at the first officer 5, and we'll look at the new hire here in just a minute. What you'll see on this spaghetti chart is if you follow Southwest orange line, you'll just see significant differences here, making the point that the comparisons between Southwest and the OALs is more dramatic on the first officer side than it is for the captain side. So you can see a lot of white space here between Southwest and the OAL American line here. And of course, then you see the change of American here on the out years. Going to a format that might look a little bit easier on the eyes, you can see that Southwest, again on the far right, sits about 5.3% above United, American, and Delta's 900 rates. This is for a first officer 5 scale. And you see the larger differences to the other airlines on the left side of the chart. And like I mentioned, for our new hires, this is where you'll see a dramatic difference. You can see if you follow the Southwest orange line in 2024, you can see how much higher we are above American, Delta, and United going forward, and that stays pretty consistent throughout the entire contract. And again, using a chart that removes some of the spaghetti lines, you can see that our new hires are at 13.2% above the Delta, American, United numbers. And again, it's a greater percentage as we compare ourselves to the other carriers. As we talk about the comparisons of Southwest aircraft against our peers, it's probably worth a minute of our time to talk about how to categorize these airplanes. You know, one of the significant outcomes of the post-pandemic cycle is all of the carriers essentially normalized their rates across equipment. And so you'll see on this chart, I divided the narrow-body flying into 3 categories. One we call extra-large narrow-body, and that's the 757 flying, the A321XLR, and the A321neos. The second category is the large narrow-body, which is a A321, not the neo version, and then the 737 MAX 9, 10, and then the 900. And then finally, we'll just say a regular narrow body, and that's the airplanes, the MAX 8, 800s, MAX 7 and 700s, and then the smaller Airbuses, 320s and 319s. So if you look at the bottom of the scale, you can see the narrow bodies of all typically for 2024 top of scale captain have landed at 358.97. Now, American, if you look on their column, in their Me Too's, they did snap to 360.85 for their smaller narrow body aircraft. But the United and Delta still using 358.97 for theirs. The large narrow body category, you can see goes up about 0.5%, so 360.85. There's just the one minor change. American has created a MAX 10 rate. They don't fly MAX 10s yet. Well, nobody flies MAX 10s right now. They're including their MAX 10s in the extra large narrow body category. And if you move up to that category, you can see that moves up another 3.7% or 4.3% above the smallest narrow bodies. And that's where 757, XLR, and the 321 NeoPay all sits at 374.36. So we're going to use these numbers as our basis of comparison. And as you'll see on the next chart, this large narrow body, the 737-900, will be what we'll be comparing the Southwest Contract 2020 rates to. So now the next couple of slides get just a little bit busier, so I'll focus your attention here inside that black box. If you look across the top, those are the years, 24, 25, 6, 7, and 8. And the TFP rates, as you saw the way at the beginning of this brief, 317.25 and moving forward across all the pay raises. The 737 hourly pay is converted at 1.149, going across from left to right. And now let's compare those pays to the other, what we would call the narrow body, large narrow body, extra large narrow body, and I also threw in the wide body comparison. So following that black box down here, you could see if you compare our 317.25 as converted would be about 1.55% above the equivalent 700, 800 rate at United. The comparison we're choosing to use is the 737-900, and it's just a rounding error, 1.02%. So it's effectively 1% above. So to read this 364.52 is 1% above the published rate for the 737-900 at Delta, American, and United of 360.85. Now, many of our pilots want to see the comparisons against the larger narrow body, and again, that's the 757, the 321 Neo, the XLR. You can see that this rate of 317.25 as converted is 2.63%, 757. And if you wanted to compare against the wide body rates, you can see it's about 18.5%. If you track this black box across, if you were to move it across, you see the comparisons don't change at all. Again, let's look at that 900 rate in the middle. We're still 1% above in 25. The rates stay 1% above in 26, but it does jump to 2% better than the 900 rates at other airlines in 27. That's because of that extra percent pay raise we spoke of in 2027. And of course, nobody's got 2028 rates, so there's no way to compare those. So now this slide shows the comparisons of the Contract 2020 pay scales a little bit differently to the other airlines. So it's a little bit of a busy slide, so I'll spend a couple of minutes here. So let's focus our attention first to the right side of the slide in the big black box. Across the top, you'll see a Captain 12 pay scale, and a little bit lower is the Captain 8 pay scale. In the big black box are the conversions at 1.149. As we said before, the big three rates for 737-900 are 360.85. That converts to 314.06. And so the 317.25, that is the top of scale captain rate in 2024, is 1% above that. The same thing is true for the Captain 8. If you look down below, the big three rate of 349.87, our converts to 304.50, 1%. And that's a function of getting those captain pay scales harmonized, like we talked at the very beginning of the brief. If you look just to the left of that red box, you can see the comparisons to the 700 and 800, again, about 1.5%. If you look to the right of that red box, there's the comparisons to the 757 rates. And you can see that the Contract 2020 rates for 2024 are about 2.6% below equivalent 757 or 321 XLR. And on the Captain 8, it's about 1.8% difference. If you look to the left in the red dash box, This is the comparisons, which quite frankly is a better comparison. Now, we've agreed for the contract 2020 that 1.149 would be the conversion rate for comparison purposes. But if you actually look at the way we fly and how our network has changed, the conversion rate is probably closer to 1.1532. And there in the red dash box, you can see that this negotiated rate is about 1.4% above there. Let's look now at the FO side, and you'll see some dramatic differences. So on the FO side, again in the black box, which is focusing on the 1.149 conversion, and in the red box inside of that is at the 900 rate, you can see that new hires are sitting at about 15.3% above United, Delta, and American. If you look at the FO5 scale, about 5.5% above, and even at the FO12 scale, about 3.5% above. Slide your eyes just to the right of that red box, and you can see the conversions to the 757. And you can see, again, the new hires are 15%. The FO5s are at 2.5% above 7.5. And it's really at the only step on the pay scale where FOs are less than 757 is at the 12 scale. And they're only at about 45 cents a TFP. So said another way, all of the FOs under contract 2020 at every step along the way, except the most senior, will be at or above the equivalent 757 rates at other airlines. If you look at to the left, the 1.1532 conversion, you can see the comparisons are even better. So this brief has covered just the changes to the pay scales, the way they were constructed with changing the captain percentage atop a scale and comparing and changes to the FO percentages of captain pay. There are, of course, a lot of other differences in compensation. There's a lot of overrides, changes to training pay, some changes to reserve pay, which were covered in other educational materials. This briefing was just meant to walk you through the structural differences and to give you a visual representation of how Contract 2020 rates compare with other airlines. That's all I have for now. Thanks for listening.